Hello and welcome to Buddha and the Coach vlog powered by Soul Performance Academy. I am your host, Dan Mickle. The Buddha and the Coach is a weekly vlog focused on looking at the teachings of the Buddha in a coaching light. The Buddha and the Coach is proudly sponsored by ICN Athletics. It's called Normal Athletics, helps make the extraordinary ordinary through adaptive beach volleyball. Everyone should have the opportunity to enjoy and excel at the sport, and ICN Athletics offers the programs and the educations to make it normal for adaptive athletes to play on any court. Help them make beach volleyball court place for everybody. For more information or to donate to their 501c3, please visit icnathletics.com. Again, that's icnathletics.com. It's called Normal Athletics, thanks to John Dave and everybody involved and their continued support of the Buddha and the Coach. All right, this week we are on lesson 23, Wear Your Ego Like a Loose-Fitting Garment. This is such a good one. I like talking about this one because it's really simple for us to talk about ego, and we think about, the arrogance that people have and how wrapped up people get in their ego, but we don't tend to talk about just the general ego that we all tend to carry a little bit and how we kind of need to keep that in check when we're working with people. And when it comes to coaches, I think a lot of times we check the ego at the door and we want to be helpful. But the other part of this is once we check the ego at the door, we fail to go to the next step, which is the empathy and looking at how others are doing things, or the struggles, or, the problems that the people that we're working with might have. We are so quick to worry about putting our ego aside, which is great, that we just never take that next step, which is kind of walking a mile in someone else's shoes that we're working with. And I think what the Buddha is saying here with the wear your ego like a loose-fitting garment is we can't get so wrapped up in our ego that we can't see the needs of other people. But the next step in this saying that I kind of want to talk about is if we wear our ego like a loose-fitting garment, it means that we could give that garment to someone else much easier. It's easier for us to transfer our knowledge because we aren't so wrapped up in what we know and what we're doing. So it's easier to give that knowledge to someone else when we treat our ego like the loose garment versus, a very tight-fitting garment that really only fits us, right? If it's tailored to me and I give someone else a suit, they're not going to fit into that because it's tailored to my needs. Whereas if I'm wearing loose garments, I can give that to someone else. I can pass that on, and then they can pass it on. And that's really what coaching and teaching and education is about, right? Is continuing to pass it on. So how do we get there? And that's a big one. And there's a couple steps, but the very first step is we have to be self-aware of what our ego is. Again, ego does good for us at times. Ego is what helps drive us a lot of times. It is what helps our spider senses tingle a little bit when we think there might be trouble or something going on. The ego helps in that. But obviously the problem is the ego kind of gets in the way at times. And we don't know that if we don't have reflection. If we are constantly go, 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 and we don't take a step back to look at how we're educating, how we're coaching, whether or not we are open to other ideas or new information. And this goes into, and we could go down rabbit holes for days about this, but this then goes into also like fallacies and biases, right? Because a lot of times we will seek out confirmation bias. We will look for articles or situations that confirm what we already know, and we feel like we are being educated. We feel like we're being enlightened, that we're moving on. But the truth is we're just feeding our ego and making it that much harder to crack when we do that, because we're not truly being open. We are just looking for that confirmation that we are right. See, I told you I was right, as opposed to looking for information to grow and look at our weaknesses. And I think that's something that we need to do a little bit more as coaches. Take a step back and say, okay, what am I weak in? What am I failing at? And how can I get better at that. And that's the first part of kind of loosening up that ego, loosening up that garment that has us all completely wrapped up, is that self-reflection. The next step then is, you would think, would be to work on that. But what I would challenge you is, instead of going straight from self-reflection and then this is what I need to work on, let's stop and look at the people you're trying to serve or work with, and then have some empathy and kind of walk a mile in their shoes and see where they're at. So the next step would be, okay, what's going on with the population I'm working with? What's going on with my students? What's going on with my players? How are they receiving the things that I'm telling them? But also, how are all the things around them? Home life, school, all the things that go into what make up a person. How is that affecting them? Because that may be a big factor of whether or not your message is not only received, but is actionable by them. They might just hear the words, but because of the circumstances that they're in, they may not be able to act on it. So you see what I'm saying? We tend to jump from reflection, okay, this is what we need to work on, straight to work on it. We never take that step in the middle, which is putting ourselves in their shoes. Are they even ready to work on this? Maybe it's a skill in an area where they're just not prepared. They're not ready to be vulnerable, which means they're not ready to open up and work on it. But we just go and do it, and then we end up getting frustrated because they're not working hard on it, or they're not getting it, they're not understanding it. But it's because we skip that step in the middle. And again, it's a lot to take that ego off and say, okay, I need to look at it from their perspective. How are they viewing this? And sometimes it may be that they're not viewing it at all. They're lost, they're confused, and that's okay. But I bet there's a lot of time that you're trying to train something, whether it's a skill or a mental skill, something new, and you get some resistance because they already have a preconceived notion of what it is or how it should be done. And if you just go in there, guns a-blazing and try and teach your method or put it in front of them, they might be a little bit more resistant. But if you take the time to look at them and figure out where they're coming from, you might find a way to crack into that, maybe even supplement what they're doing with what you're trying to teach, or you at least have the points of saying, okay, I understand why you're doing it this way, but if we try to do it this way, it might work better. It'll also give them some trust with you because they realize that you're taking the time to figure out what's going on with them. You're taking time to figure out why they do it the way they do. And I think one of the biggest lessons that I learned when I started working with coaches, more than just actually coaching my sport, traveling around, and now it's great because I get to do it in multiple sports, football, baseball, basketball, volleyball, even in the corporate world. One of my favorite things to do now is when I go in and I consult and we're looking at something and seeing what we can do better, instead of just saying, hey, I think you should do it this way, the very first thing I ask is, why are you doing it this way? Why do you currently do it that way? And it's not me trying to cut them down and saying, well, this is why it's bad and you shouldn't do it this way. It's more about, I want to learn their thought process. I want to know why they thought this was the route that they should go. Maybe I'll learn something about their situation. As someone that's maybe not part of their culture coming in, maybe there's things that I don't know, and that's why they're making those decisions. And then maybe we can enhance that, as opposed to, throwing everything out and trying to start with a new methodology or what we're trying to train. I can pull in parts of it. And you'd be surprised at when you can incorporate what someone else is doing into your plan, how much more buy-in and dedication you get in that situation. If I say, hey, we need to rework how we're doing this training, but if we bring in this aspect that you're already doing and add in my new thoughts, man, we're going to knock this out of the park. You are going to get so much more commitment and buy-in from those people because they feel like they have some sort of ownership in the situation. And this kind of goes back to, if you've ever heard me talk about culture, team culture, and sports coaching in the youth population specifically, I talked about finding areas where you can let the team make the decisions. And one of the things I love doing is, when it comes to team rules, is let the team make the rules. Again, if you heard this speech before, I'm sorry that I'm kind of going over it again, but let them decide what's important to them. Now, obviously, you're going to have some rules that are very important to you, drug, alcohol, those sort of things, but let them decide what happens if players are late for practice. Give them that buy-in. And this goes back to what the Buddha is saying about wearing the ego like a loose-fitting garment, because you as a coach may have to do some things that are like, that's not how I would do it. But if it gets buy-in from your team, for example, if you're one of those, hey, if you're 15 minutes late, don't come to practice at all. That's your punishment. Maybe the team's like, hey, if they're 15 minutes late, they're going to have to clean up after practice. That's their punishment. So you kind of swallow that and say, okay, that's what we're going to go with. That's you checking your ego at the door to let the team decide what they want to do and get more buy-in and probably get more productivity out of your team and more commitment out of your team by doing it. But again, it goes back to you need to check your ego and say, okay, this is something I can negotiate on. Again, I get there are some things that you want, drug policy, overnight stay policies, those types of things. I totally get that. But look for the areas where you can check your ego and let them make some decisions and have some buy-in. And that's where you can see some real growth, not only in the production of your team, but also the growing of that team culture. We're always looking at ways that we can build team bonding and team culture, and we do all these crazy things, rope climbs, trust falls, lava floors, and all those weird activities, and they're all great. But man, just getting commitment from the team and letting them have some buy-in in the policies and decision making on the team is going to pay huge dividends over some of those other things. But again, as a coach, we're going to have to check the ego, because there are times that your team's going to decide to do things that go against what you think. And again, we're not talking about things that are going to change the outcome of games or your season. We're talking about the little things, but it gives them buy-in. But you're going to have to say, man, I wouldn't do it that way, but hey, that's what they want to do. We're going to do it. And I think that's really what the Buddha's talking about here in his lesson. Wear your ego like a loose-fitting garment. You have to be able just to let things go. Don't get so wrapped up in things that it has to be this way. It needs to just be kind of flowing and comfortable. So that's my challenge for you guys this week. Start to look at how you run practice, or what your team rules are, or how you interact with your players, your other staff members, your administration, and look at areas where you can let go of your ego and maybe let other people dictate or, suggest things. And remember, we talked about there's those 3 steps. You have to have that self-reflection. And then step 2 is you need to have some empathy, and you need to look at it from your players or your staff, whoever you're working with, their point of view. And then we offer the suggestions and the training and try to focus it. And I think as coaches and educators, if we took the little bit more time to ask, why are you doing it this way, instead of just jumping into, well, this is how we need to do it and this is how we should fix it. And it's funny because, especially doing more consulting work now, you would think that that's the way I would do it. Like it's not like Bar Rescue, the TV show, where, John Taffer comes in and says, you need to change all this, and this. I want to come in and say, okay, explain to me why you're doing it this way. And then let's see what we need to work on and what we can fix and what we can add. And again, that's me wearing my ego like that loose garment. I'm not all wrapped up in my ego and saying, look, this is how it should be done. This is the way that we need to do it. And again, that goes with you and your students and your players. Don't be afraid to ask them why they're doing things and look at it from their point of view. It may cause you less stress, but it may also help you find new ways to teach and educate more down the road. Oh, I never thought about how this affected a person. So take that time, check the ego. Everything doesn't have to be on your terms, and bring more input and more community into your coaching and your teaching and your education. And I think not only are you going to have better results on the field, the court, the pitch, the boardroom, the stage, whatever you're working with, but I think you as a coach are also going to have a little bit less burnout, because you're not going to have that conflict always back and forth of what's going on. And it's a little bit more peace of mind when you start to get the input of the people that you're educating, and just getting to start to know them. You get more trust, there's more buying. There's just a lot of great reasons on why we should do that. So again, look through your lessons plan, your practice plans, everything you're doing, and say, hey, how can I check my ego, and how can I get more buy-in from the people that I'm working with? How can I bring them into the equation, and maybe get some feedback and information so that we can all make this better? But too many times as coaches, we get wrapped up in ego. This is the way it has to be. I've won championships, so this is the way we're going to do everything. And we need to step back from that. So, all right. Peace, much love, happiness. Don't suck. And don't forget, one day or day one, it's your choice of what's going to be. And you can catch us across all social media at Real Dan Mickle or at 717 Soul for Soul Performance Academy, danmickle.com. You can reach me, email Dan at danmickle.com. But yeah, share, like, subscribe. Let's get the word out and get more views. If you have any questions, thoughts, or comments, put them below. Let's have a discussion. Tell me how you check your ego when you're working with a team in the comments. Would love to hear it. See y'all next week.